Hey everybody, DJ here, and welcome to another tutorial. This one is going to be on ProRender and how to render out hair. So I'll be showing you how to create this really quick hair simulation, do some settings, and then we can render this bad boy out. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. We also have a Discord server. If you have any questions or you need some help, you can jump on there. And if you are feeling generous, you can always donate via the Patreon. Link is below in the video description. And so let's go ahead and start in Blender. And if we just open it up, and you'll need to make sure that you have the ProRender add-on installed. And I am using actually the new, if I go here to the preferences, I can show you which one I'm using. And let's go to ProRender here. So you can see right here, I am using 3.0.33, which just came out. It's a development build this week. I'll put a link to where you can download that in the description below. And it's getting really, really good. There are a lot of updates that have been happening, and the interface overall is a lot more stable, and there's some really great stuff. So make sure that you download the newest version. And we're just going to start off by going over here to the render setting, and we're going to change this to Radeon Prorender. And before we begin, make sure you have your render device selected from here. And let's go down to the viewport and preview. And we're actually going to change this from minimum 64 to 32 and max to 64. And for those of you who have a lower powered sort of computer, this will really help you out. So make sure that you don't skip this step here. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to take this cube, hit F3, and we're going to type in quick fur right here. And that's going to basically bring up some a really quick hair simulation, and we're going to do some adjustments in this in just a moment. So again, F3, do a search for quick fur, and go ahead and add that. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the particle properties, and I'm going to run through a lot of this stuff rather quickly. This isn't a specific hair tutorial. It's more about shading it and how you can sort of adjust some things. If you are interested in a longer tutorial on hair, I do have that, and I'll put a card in right here so you can check it out. But this is going to be more for just looking at some of the pro render settings and how to get a decent hair shading and render going on. So let's go here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to change the hair length here to 0.75. So we're going to make it a bit longer, like this. We're going to change the number of segments here to 10. And what we will do is also we're going to go to the render setting here, and we're going to change this step. So a lot of people don't really know this, but if you go to the render and the viewport display and you change the steps here, it will actually add a lot more detail when we start adding things like kinks and some noise and some just general like messing up the hair. So for the render, we're just going to set this to, and you'll have to be careful with this. We're going to set it to a 6 right now. When you get to the render stage and all that, your computer will slow down a little bit. If you are running into issues with the render, you can reduce this. So we also want to go down to the viewport display here, and I'm going to change this to a 5. You're more than welcome to keep it a 3 or a 4 or something like that, but hopefully you won't have that much of an issue with this set because there's some really cool stuff we can do if the viewport display is up higher. So then let's go down to children. It's already set to interpolated, and we'll keep the display. Actually, let's make this 1. We'll just change this to a 1 right now so we can sort of see what's going on. And what we're going to do first is we're going to go down to where it says kink, and we're going to change this to curl. And you can see that it already has started to add some really interesting curl shapes just by putting that on there. And what we're going to do is we're going to tighten up the curl a bit. So if we take the amplitude and we pull it down to let's do a 0.086 or something like that. And then let's go to the frequency here. And so basically this is how tight the curls are, and then the frequency is basically how much that curl is happening. So for the frequency, we're just going to put this at a 3.1. So there we have that. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a little bit of roughness to this because it's a little bit too uniform as far as the overall hair shaping and all that. So what we'll want to do is just go in here and we're going to take the uniform and we're just going to pump that up. We're going to do about a 1.48 here. So it gets a little bit like that. Okay, a little bit crazy. And then also right here, the size. The larger you make the size, it's kind of like a noise shape. So the larger it is, the more you'll have like these large pieces that are a bit longer, and then these other ones that are, set like that. So what we want to do here is I actually want to take this and bring it down a bit, because when we do our render, I don't want to see the edges really of this shape. So I'm going to pull the size down to about a 0.7. I'm just going to type in a 0.7 here. So something kind of like that. So that's basically going to be the overall hair shaping. So it's a little messy, it has a little bit of curl to it, and that's going to probably do just fine. Now, the other thing here that we need to keep in mind is the actual hair shaping. So if we go to the hair shape right here and we look at this, this is going to actually change how thick everything is and how the rendering is going to be done. But before we actually do some of that, I want to add some shading to the surface object, the box itself, and to the hair, just so that we get a better idea about how this is starting to sort of shape up. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to go over here. We're going to left click and drag this to split our panel. And we're going to go and change this to the shader editor right here. So it always starts off with the principled BSDF here, but we're going to go ahead and get rid of that, and we're going to change this to the RPR Uber node. And if you really want to see how this is done, sort of step by step, I do have a whole series on my channel about how to basically use this, but we're just going to be rushing through a couple things here just to set some general settings. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to call this something else. So we have a fur material you can see here, which we're going to do something with, and then we have this that's just called material. And I'm going to change this to box. You can call it surface or skin or whatever you want. And what we want to do here is we actually want to add a subsurface. And for the diffuse color, I'm just going to pick a generalized fleshy tone. And then for the subsurface, I'm going to pick something a little bit more red, like that would be underneath the skin. Maybe something like this. And then I'm going to click on the subsurface multiple scattering there. And that's going to basically do it for the box. Now we need to make sure that this is actually going to be applied to the box material itself. So I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode. And then over here, I'm going to click right here where it says assign. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now the box will have that material. Now for the fur material, this is automatically set through cycles. So let's actually delete this. So we're going to remove this material slot. And we're going to add a new one. So hit this add material slot. And we're going to call this new. And we're going to call this hair. Okay. And then we're going to go back to the hair material properties. And we're going to make sure that this is set to hair, which it is. So we're good. Now, in order for us to create this hair material for it to render kind of more like a realistic hair shader, what we need to do is change up some of these parameters here. And I have seen that they will be adding the principled hair BSDF, which is going to be awesome once that's done. But in the time being, and for the time being, and for how people need to have this stuff done now, and actually this using this method I'm going to show you does increase some of the speed of rendering. It just doesn't give you as much variation as you may want. This method is going to work just fine. So what we want to do is we want to bring up the hair BSDF, and you'll see that there is a reflection and a transmission. If you click and you look at this drop down, there's a couple different things here. And if we take this and we just pipe it right into the surface, and let's just take let's actually save this really quick. So file, save as, and I'm going to call this hair tutorial 1. We'll want to go ahead and set this to rendered. And you can see that it started up pretty quick. Like I said, there's a lot of new things that are being developed that increases the speed of this. And I don't currently have an HDRI background, which is okay. We're just going to mess with a couple things just like how it is here at the default. So if we go here to the reflection and you start to change the color, you can see that you're starting to change the overall reflected color that's going on here. And that's just fine. You have this and you can change this to a dark brown or something. And, you kind of have that, and then you can change the roughness here if you want to something that's a little bit, less rough. But overall, it's not looking super great. And part of the problem is that we have this sort of plain background that's just boring. Okay, so that's the first issue. The second issue is that you can't just use a reflection for the hair to be rendered in a more realistic way. So, and also we do have a very uniform coloring, which is not really accurate to the realism of how hair is in real life. There's usually some variance, which is why the principled hair BSDF is so great for cycles, but we're not using cycles right now. So let's do a couple things here. First, let's look at the overall shaping of our hair. Now, if you look at this really closely, and we're just going to zoom in a little bit, you can see that it's kind of, yeah, it's got some thickness to it, and it's overall looking okay. And if you felt like you wanted this to be quite a bit different, you can make some changes with your hair shape over here in the hair particle properties. So for example, the diameter scale, if you felt like these were a little bit too thick, you could change this by, let's divide it by 2, so /2, and now it's half the thickness as it was before. You can also take the root, which is where it connects to your object here, and you can increase the root overall shape. And the tip is at a 0.25. You can change this to, like, let's say a zero point 0.5. And that's going to change the overall thickness of the hair as it is. I'm just going to change it to 1 really quick. And you can see that it basically just stays the same size throughout. So maybe that's what you're looking to do. But if you change this to a 0, because the tip of hair is almost always going to be a 0, you can see that it's starting to take on a little bit more of a realistic shaping because the very, very tip is pretty much not visible and it goes off into like a wispiness. So I will tell you right now that this does increase the amount of render time when we start adding some other things to the scene. So if it's slow, that might be one of the reasons. And I've noticed that if I take this and I change it to, say, a 0.05 or something like that, so pretty close to a 0, you can actually get a better render result, or sometimes a faster render result, just by making that change. So it's really up to you on how you want to deal with that. And then for the diameter scale, if you want to get really funky, you can change this to like a 0.25. That's actually a little bit too crazy. Let's maybe change this to a 0.05 or something. You can see that you can make some really weird looking um, shapes. Like, say you're trying to make some sort of ivy or something like that. You can make some really, really fun shapes by doing this. Now I'm going to keep this like this because I want to show you how you can add some color variance in the overall coloring of this object. So ProRender, you have to remember you kind of need a UV unwrapped object to apply images to. The procedural way is not 100% perfect right now, so I wouldn't rely on it to do those sort of procedural textures as you may be used to in cycles or something like that. But since this is a cube, it already has UV coordinates. So I'm just going to add a image texture, and I'm just going to save and change this to a solid because sometimes when you mess around too much with stuff over here for it to load, it might crash the viewport and you might lose some work. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to press open, and I'm actually going to go to the materials that you can download. And I do have a video that I'll throw up on the screen right here. I'll put a card in so you can go to that video on how to download and install um, the material library. But I'm going to take this bronze corroded one right here. I'm just going to take this one and I'm going to open that up, and I'm just going to put that into the color right here with the hair BSDF, okay? And if we look at this through the rendered view, you can see that now we have a variance in the coloring going on with all the strands. And what's really great is you can actually take this and you can throw this through a color ramp like this, and you can have it black and white, or you can change this to a color. So if we go to a dark brown here, and again, sometimes you might want to put this on this. Let's actually do it right now. Put this onto this mode here so it's a little bit easier on your computer. But you can change this to a dark brown, change this to ease so it's a little bit more of a smooth gradation. Take the white here and make it, I don't know, something maybe orangish like that. And you can move this around if you'd like. But if we take a look at this through the rendered view now, you can see that there's a little bit more variance in what the hair coloring is, which is pretty cool. And from here, you can also play around a little bit more with these roughness settings. So basically, the way that this is done is that the roughness is set in two different directions, the U and the V, and you can play around with these to get it how you'd like it. I've noticed that setting the roughness rather high and keeping this kind of more at the default with the 0.25 here is a little bit more natural when we start adding the other part of this hair texture. It's really, I would say this is an area that you should really play with so that you can see what you like and just see how everything kind of works. In general, if your hair is in the rain or you have grease in it or something like that, the roughness should be lower. And if it's more like natural hair, then you probably should have pretty high roughness. And all hair has a little bit of a sheen to it, but not quite as crazy as, a zero on here or something like that. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do actually is we have to add another shader. So if you go to shader, add shader, and what we want to do here is we want to go to the hair BSDF, and let's actually make this solid here. And we need to have the transmission. So the transmission will need to go in here, and then those are added together to make a new material. So a transmission is basically it's the sort of like the see-through business of your hair, and then the reflection is the reflected color. So technically, our hair should be a transmission color and not the reflection, and the reflection should be a lighter version of what the solid color should be. So let's switch this up a little bit here. And it's of course the best thing that you can do is mess around with all of these settings so you can really get a good idea about what all of these do. Okay, so the other thing that we really need to do here in order to make this hair look a lot better is we have to set up our environment light. Right now there's just a solid white color going on and it's not really that great. So I'm going to go to solid mode here, and this is where I'll really say you want to do this because I have crashed the viewport a couple times doing this. Go to your world settings, go to environment light here, go to open, and just like any of my other tutorials, if you're used to it or if you're used to doing these, I get all of my HDRIs from hdrihaven.com, so you can check that out in the video description below. There will be a link where you can get this, and I'm just going to pick this Studio Small here. And then what we'll do is just go to the rendered view and take a look at what's going on. So overall, the lighting should be a lot more accurate to real life. And what we want to do is we want to actually take this hair shape and make it more accurate to what we want it to be. So we're going to go down and we're going to take the diameter scale and we're going to put this at a 0.01, which gives us more of a realistic idea about what the hair is going to kind of look like. And I'll want to take this and I'll take this to a 0.25. And I think for this one here, I'm just going to go with maybe a darker color. So let's do there, bring this down a bit. Maybe something more like that. Yeah, that seems a little bit more natural. And then what you'll want to do, if we go to solid mode here, you'll want to go to your children settings, and you remember that we made this display amount 1. Make this 100. And you can see that now we can really see what's going on with this object or with the hair. And if we change this to rendered, and this might take a while for you, so you might want to change the interpolation to a 10 or something to see if your computer can actually handle it, because it might take a little while for this to load up. So you'll want to give it a second so you can really take a look at how this is shaping up. And here we have it rendering out and you can see right up here the iteration. It says 34 and 64. So that's why I said you might want to do that, is because if you don't set this up, it will just keep rendering. And for those of you with not as high powered computers as I have, it might really slow down your rendering of the scene. So that's why I said that to begin with. But now you can start to see that that the hair is starting to look a lot more realistic, and you can really start to play with some of your other settings to get this kind of more where you want it to be in regards to the overall shaping and all that kind of stuff. So I do recommend that you play with the colors here, and where it comes out of here for the different sort of like coloring that happens, you can actually put in a texture coordinate. And I'm just going to change this to solid because it's really going slow because I'm moving stuff around in here. So texture coordinate, and then we want to do a mapping node. So vector mapping like this. Take the UV, put it right here. Take the vector, put it right here. And then you can change the scaling here. And I'm just going to take the children here. I'm going to put it down to 10 so it's a little bit easier for us to kind of see what's going on. But if we change this to let's do a 5 instead of a 10. Let me take a look. It's going to change the how the UV image, or how the image is being mapped onto the UV surface. So this is basically scaling it 5 times. So there's going to be a tighter pattern mapped to it, which means that the amount of variance is going to increase. Whereas a 1 would be a larger sort of image mapping, and that may or may not make sense to you guys. You should understand a little bit about UV mapping and how that works on an object. If you're kind of at this point of doing hair and all that kind of stuff, I do have videos on my channel that kind of goes over this kind of stuff. But you can see how cool this is starting to look with all of these, with the settings that we've done here. And it's starting to look a lot more realistic with the variance and all that stuff. So the next thing that you really want to do is you want to set up a proper lighting. So this is obviously not a something that I would recommend that you do as a final or something. It's more of testing and checking and seeing how your materials are ending up. If you go up here to the 3D viewport, and we'll actually change this to a solid view here. And I'm going to take the lamp, and let's do this. Let's hit N. We're going to go to view, camera, lock the camera to the view right here so that we can kind of move around this object and get it in our frame. And since it's more of like a box shape, let's go over here to our dimensions, and I'm going to set the resolution of the X to a 1080 so it's more of a square. And then we'll zoom in a bit like this. And I'll take the light right here, and I'm just going to grab that and move it to the other side of our cube, maybe up here as kind of like a backlight. And we're going to take the world here, and we're going to change the environment light here. Let's change that to a 0. And look at this in the rendered view. And go to our light properties. And you can see that that backlight there is causing a really cool sort of like shine through effect. And we can change this to use a temperature for the coloring. And we'll change this to a 5500 because that's usually a good temperature for skin tones and things like that. And let's change the shadow soft size here. Let's make this a 0.01, and that's going to make the highlights a lot tighter overall on our hair. So it's going to look really shiny off the tips like that right there. Then let's take the power and let's change this to, let's do 2000 watts. Let's do something like that. And then let's change this to a solid view here. Going to take this lamp here, and I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it and pull it over here on the other side of my camera and put it about right there. And let's change the shadow soft size, change this to a 0.1, and let's make this 1000. And I'm going to actually change the temperature here to a 7700, which is going to make it a little bit more like a natural light, like kind of like light coming through a window or something like that. It's not going to be super, dramatic or anything, but it'll just have a little bit of a change in the color temperature there for the lighting. And let's take a look and see what that looks like. So we have some, fairly flat lighting, so to speak, right here. You could play with this and add a lot more of the lighting coming from here if you'd like, but I think that this is okay. And let's go to the world settings. I'm gonna change the intensity here to a 0.25. So we get just a bit of the overall lighting around the scene. And we can see there it goes. It's rendering out right there. And that's looking pretty good. And what we want to do here, for those of you who are unaware, you can change the rendering. If you go to the film for the background right here, you can see there's a transparent background selection right here. And it won't show up in your viewport. So when you go to the rendered view, you're not necessarily going to see it in the background here. But when you render, you will notice that it is actually transparent. And then what we'll do here is, if you were going for final, change this to a 200%. And just remember that this is not going to be what you see in the final, because remember, in our render, we have 6 steps. So there's going to be a lot more detail in the amount of curls that are going on. And right here, we have only 10 displayed, but it's going to render 100. So if we change this right here to 100 to display it, this is more of what we should see in the final render. Okay, so just keep that in mind before you hit that render button. I'm going to change this back to 10, save the file, and actually before we want to go ahead and hit that F12 button, what we want to do is we want to go over to our render settings, our render properties, and we're just going to change a couple things really quick just to make this a little bit nicer. So if you go over to the sampling, you can see here that the render sampling is 64 to 128. That's just fine. And what we want to do, we do have a noise threshold here, so that's for the adaptive sampling. So you could just leave that where it is. But what we want to do is we want to go down here to quality. And you can see that this is at full, which we want to keep because that's the new 2.0 renderer. Let's just change this to 16. And we'll want the glossy to go up to probably a 12. Refraction, let's put that up to a 16. Glossy refraction, let's put that up to a 16. Shadow can stay 5. Diffuse, let's put up to a 5. So basically, we're just adding a little bit more detail in the rendering according to what we have going on here, which is transmission shaders and some roughness and all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead, and from this point, we will hit F12 and render this out. So there you have it. Basically, from this point on, you have a decent starting point to start making some adjustments. You can maybe make the hair a little bit smaller, add some more roughness, or remove some of the roughness, or change some of the kink values, or the overall tip values, or maybe add some more lighting. Looks like there probably could be a little bit higher lighting over here. And then you can have a really nice, at least starting point for your materials and the hair that you're going to be using for any sort of creatures or characters or whatever. And what's really cool is you can go into the Compositing tab, click on Use Nodes, and you're going to have the alpha channel there. So you can take this, mix it with a color, put this in the bottom here, change this to a black, and then you can have it to where, let's just change the view here, fit, and you can see that now you have a black over the top there, or behind your hair render, and you can start to play with compositing these together to make something really cool. So hopefully this helped you out with understanding how to render out some hair inside of ProRender. I know that a lot of people would love to have that principled hair BSDF, and it is being worked on as far as I can tell, so you can look forward to that. And also check out my other tutorials that I have on my channel for ProRender if you need any more guidance, and I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.